There we are. And good morning, everybody. We are live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Another week of fantastic food safety, food quality, amazing products, feeding the nation. And if nobody out there tells you this, Alicia and I are going to tell you right now. Good job. You did a good job. And we really appreciate what you did because you're keeping us all with good food and good happiness. And I think I'm going to do some applause here. You earned it this week. Good job. So if you're new to the food safety chat, pull up a chair and join us. We're going to talk about food safety for an hour. And what you'll notice is this is not a lecture. This is where I get the pleasure of bringing on a food safety expert and we talk about a subject. And the best part of this is you, because this is a conversation around what interests you. So make sure and put in the comments anything that's of interest with our topic, and we'll kind of weave it into our conversation here today. So if you're a regular on the chat, first off, welcome back. Let us know where in the world you are at. And I am in Loveland, Colorado, where summer is here. It has been quite warm, mid-90s, Alicia.
Oh, that's very warm.
Yes, definitely. And we actually got some rain in the middle of the night, which is kind of a mixture of hail, and it was strong enough that it woke us up. So that was like, wow. So hopefully we looked outside in the morning, all our plants were okay. So that was good. Hail in Colorado this time of year is a major concern for your car. So you have to be careful with that. So if you're somebody who's been on the chat before, like Tim, good morning, Tim. And I saw a video this morning with Tim with his son playing the keyboard, which was super cool. Thanks for sharing that, Tim. So of course, my guest here this week is Alicia Swanson, food safety consultant and PCQI lead instructor. How are you doing today, Alicia?
I'm well. Thank you so much, Brian. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, thanks for joining us. We always love having you on because you have had an amazing adventure, which we're going to be talking about here shortly. So everybody, please let us know where in the world you are at. So where are you located at, Alicia?
I am in Portland, Maine. Weather has been in the low 70s, which is warm for us. So, summer's just beginning here.
Now, do you guys get humidity? Do you get humidity up there?
No, not so much. Nothing like Florida or in the South.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, humidity. I'm not a big fan of humidity. Morning, Jordan. Good to see you. So with that, let us join together for a drink of your favorite beverage in a mushroom mug. Cheers.
Cheers. Happy Friday, everybody.
You go ahead. It's my third cup of coffee, so we'll see how amped up I am here for the chat.
Morning.
That's right. Early for me. So let's dive in here today because we got so much to cover. One of the biggest challenges with food companies is suppliers. And there's a reason why when FDA put together FSMA and they put together prerequisites and the preventive controls. And I always tend to think of this, Alicia, as kind of a two-tiered approach. You have your prerequisite programs, which are kind of the blocking and tackling. If you don't get these things right, Allie, if you don't get these things right, then the rest of the stuff doesn't matter. So if you have bad GMPs, you're not going to have good programs because who cares? Everything's dirty anyway. Above that, FDA put the preventive controls in place. So in my take on this, and let me know if you agree, Alicia, is that these are the super important things, right? So sanitation, allergen control, supplier performance, these type of things that you really, really need to pay attention to. And this also cross-links then with foreign supplier verification, which some people know this, some people don't. So FSMA is under 21 CFR 117. Foreign supplier verification, nope, not even in that area. It's in 1.5. It's kind of squirreled off by itself. And people get caught by this. Last time I checked, non-compliances with foreign supplier verification, the number one thing that FDA was issuing 483s to companies for was not having a proper foreign supplier verification program. And you may think you're not buying from foreign suppliers, but I bet you are. Almost all of the vitamins, chemicals for food, sodium citrates, things like this, all come from China. And if you're a big company, the bigger you are, the bigger this issue is. When I was working for a large dairy company, we did a survey across the entire company of how many different items we purchased for producing products. And it was 6,000 different items, Alicia.
A lot, yeah.
And of those, how do you even manage those foreign suppliers? So it's a big issue, isn't it?
It can be. It definitely can be. And you kind of, and again, some of us don't pay attention to it because we're buying these ingredients from a warehouse or a broker, right? We don't think. So it definitely is eye-opening. You've got to do your homework and do your due diligence. Does this apply to you or not? And if it doesn't, okay, great. But it probably does somewhere.
Right. And that's an important point. I'm glad you brought that up. Brokers and distributors are not manufacturers. And as we know, a lot of times they are reluctant to give you their source. But you have to go back to the source. In the US or foreign, it doesn't matter. If product is coming into the US and it's coming from, let's say, I don't know, India, and it's coming from a particular factory, you need to know that, because in your supplier qualification program, you need to approve that facility. The broker doesn't make anything. That person is just facilitating those trades. They may be highly involved with the supplier, they may not be. And you need to understand that supply chain. It's extremely critical, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. You got to know what you're working with and where it's coming from.
Yep. And so I think with this, and it kind of goes back to my example earlier with thousands of suppliers, you need to approach this from a prioritization standpoint. So just like we do in FSMA, Alicia, is risk and severity, likelihood and severity. And with those suppliers, which are the ones that you need to be the most concerned about? Should I pay attention to salt? Yeah, I need documentation on salt to make sure the basics are being met. Make sure it doesn't have heavy metals or things like this. Do I need to worry about pathogens in salt? No. So it's kind of lower on the list. As you kind of go up on that list, things become more critical to your business. So key ingredients, single source suppliers, high risk materials, things that we see out there that we need to be concerned about. And that's kind of where this all started, right? And your whole adventure, because you went on a supplier visit to India, and we're kind of going to go through all of this, which I think is fascinating, because I mean, with this, Alicia, first off, this assignment, and keep in mind too, guys, we're going to have to kind of be careful on how we approach this, because we want to maintain confidentiality for clients and make sure everything's protected. So we'll keep it at that level, and we'll cross-check each other to make sure we don't stray off. But how did you get this assignment in the first place?
Okay. Through word of mouth, first of all. So it was a past client. But before I get into that, I just want to rewind for a minute and just kind of reiterate what you said. And yes, it is based on risk. So one of those being pathogens or allergens. Is it a direct consumable? So that was mentioned a few times during my visit. So we're going to come back to that. And even though it may be a low risk product, we're still subject to all of this stuff. So I think that's a good point it is risk based. Mm-hmm. So an old client that I worked with had a supplier, and they said, we're dealing, like, there were a lot of little pieces to this. And they said, we're working with foreign supplier. Are you registered with FDA? And it just kind of bloomed from there. And next thing you know, this supplier in India was calling saying, hey, we got your name from my old client. Mm-hmm. They work together, and we're about to get an FDA inspection, and we really don't know what to expect. And we were given your name. So that's kind of how that came to be. So someone this is their supplier, and they said, hey, you're going to get, audited, FDA audited. Let's get you some help. So it was a win-win. The supplier still needs to be able to supply to the United States, and then all the customers still need to be able to, get that product in. So it's in everybody's benefit to work together to make sure that the suppliers, foreign or domestic, but we happen to be talking foreign, that the suppliers are, have their stuff together.
Mhm. Interesting. We'll talk a little bit about this a little bit more later on, but one thing I wanted to pull out there that you've mentioned is that FDA told them that they were coming, and that's not how it works in the US, is it?
No, not always. So this was very interesting. And by the way, I did learn FDA has a separate division for foreign auditors and inspectors. So there's a group of them
Uh-huh.
in certain, stationed in certain areas. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So if it's not every inspector heading over to another country, it's a core group of them. And because it was their very first one, they did get notice. They got an email. They had to fill out a questionnaire, a lot of facility information, a lot of the basic information that you would give FDA when you're filling out for your registration,
Mhm.
size, products, employee numbers. So FDA reached out, fill this out. Based on what you tell us, we will be scheduling an inspection out there. So
Mm.
we got very lucky. We got about 3 months notice that he was coming. It happened, we didn't know who. It happened to be a man. So I say he, but we didn't know who was coming. So we got 3 months notice, and that seems like a short amount of time. But it all got done. And so it was actually, it was a great story. It's a good story. Stick around, everybody. This is going to be a fun podcast.
And Cortland and Duncan are here as well. So good to see you guys. So some good comments coming in here. So Cortland said, wow, look at this. FDA has an office in India. So
Yes, they do.
do you know if this person who visited then, was he based in India or did he fly in to do the audits or?
He flew in and he was stationed in North Carolina.
Wow.
So I want to say Durham, but don't quote me on that one. I think that's the FDA. I'm not sure. And yes, they do have somebody stationed there. How it got crossed and all this, I don't know the answer to that. But so that I'm not sure about. But you're right,
Well,
they do have an office there.
well, and you got to figure too that FDA wants to cross train as well. So maybe this was a cross training opportunity where an investigator in the U.S. Hey, we're going to send you on some overseas audits to get some experience, or it could be covering for other people. Yeah, who knows? Duncan makes a great comment here as well. So this is exactly what we're talking about: is you can't risk assess materials in isolation, right? It needs to be part of your program and process dependent. So obviously then with the former client who reached out to you to help this supplier, this was an important supplier for the company then, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm going to tell you this. I won't mention names, but I have seen this company in many food manufacturing warehouses that I've audited over the years. So it was not until I got there and saw their final package that went, oh, click, like I have seen this product.
It's always funny. That's one of the things that I always love to do. Is when I go to the grocery store, my wife always rolls her eyes. I'll always point out the products that I helped make over my career. And it's a good source of pride, isn't it?
It can be. It's great, right?
So then they supplied in the US, they supply all over the place. They had reached out to you and said, help, FDA is coming in 3 months. Can you come over here and help us, essentially, right?
Yes. So that's
Wow.
pretty much exactly how it happened. A couple Zoom calls before they, reached out with the opportunity, and I jumped on it, to go to India, and that was exciting. And to inspect again, consulting doesn't always get me inspecting. It has me doing a lot of writing and reviewing.
Right.
I love inspecting. And once we got through the visa process, that was a little ticklish. But once we got through the visa, then I was on my way.
Interesting. So were you able to do a lot of the documentation review before you got over there? So you kind of got an idea what was going on, or how did you get a lot of information ahead of time?
Not really. We did some, right? Because I didn't know what I was walking into. And one of the good things is that this company was already GFSI certified.
Oh, that's good.
Yes. So they had experience with at least third-party audits. And not just that, but heavy document third-party audits like a GFSI. So part of the Zoom conversations were, do you have certain things in place? And she shared her screen with me and clicked on a few things. Everything I saw looked really good. So I didn't feel the need to review things ahead of time. But absolutely, I could have and have done in the future, and have done in the past. But this particular case, I didn't look at much, just the basics, and saw that everything was buttoned up. They had been getting good scores. The write-ups had good corrective actions. They just didn't know what to expect with FDA coming. So they thought there was a difference. And there kind of is.
Yeah, there is. Absolutely. So how was the language barrier? Was everything okay on that side?
I was lucky, and again, a lot of people in India do speak English, and all of their documents were in English. But they do speak many different languages. And the company I had, most of them spoke, I want to say Hindi. But the accents were a little, there was a couple times where I had to say, oh, I'm sorry, could you repeat that? And there were times where they had to tell me, could you slow down? So that was interesting, but they spoke English and the records were in English. So it was actually quite easy as far as that.
Nice. So then how many times did you go over to help them prepare?
So I've been there 3 times now, 2 times to help prepare and 1 time for the actual audit.
So in this role, when you were helping them, do you think, Alicia, were you functioning more as an auditor or more as a consultant, or was it kind of a combination?
It was a combination. That's a great question. So when I first got there, they said, we didn't tell anybody that you were coming. They think you are the inspector. So we did a dry run. So I did a pre-audit or a pre-inspection, if you will, to where people they did not know who I was. They didn't know when I was coming. And that was very, very eye-opening. By the second time, after, they fixed everything and we did it again, it was a much better situation, and they answered the questions a little better, right? They still stumbled a little bit. Everybody stumbles when they're put on the spot. But they picked it up, and they answered all the questions, and it was much easier. So I pretended to be inspector in the beginning. And then once we had the week of the audit, I was there as a consultant to also help fill in any potential gaps that may be there that the inspector didn't understand, or maybe the facility didn't understand. And just to be a source to say, hey, we've got somebody from the US with experience, and we want to show that we're trying to do the right thing.
Well, and I would imagine that commitment on the part of the supplier to invest in you to do all this type of work, that probably impressed FDA as well, right?
It did. And he made several comments. We went above board. And before we get too much into this, I do want to say this was a pharmaceutical company, but they had food. They made products that were food additives and dietary supplements. The good news is that they had dedicated lines. So that definitely helps. Okay. So when Duncan was talking about risk, this was considered low risk. This was not even a finished product. It's their finished product, but coming to us in the States, we're not scooping it out and eating it. It's an additive. It's a food additive.
Right.
So it went well.
So Cortland has a question for you here. So he wants to know, how was middle management in their attitudes? How were they to work with?
Okay, they were great. They really were great. They were nervous, which who wouldn't be, right? You don't know. You hear stories from surrounding facilities, about their experience, but every experience is different. But I think they really appreciated the help. They're very, very meticulous and wanted, dot their I's and cross their T's. So if there was a suggestion that was made to the team, like, oh, we know they're going to ask about pest control. So what are some of the bullet points that we can hit before he asks? And the next thing you know, they're making PowerPoints. Oh, here's the frequently asked questions about pest control. Here's frequently asked questions about sanitation. And it was amazing, and it blew his mind. And he was just taking his notes, and he was like, I don't need to see anything else. This is great. And it was amazing. So I think they learned a lot. They got to apply, like their side of it. Let's put these PowerPoints together. And they were great to work with, really.
Yeah. So here's another good question coming up here, and it leads into my next question. So I want to make sure everybody's clear on this. The differences between auditing and consulting. So consulting is you go in and you help develop programs, you help develop systems, you help, behind the scenes, really digging into the guts of how people do things. And it's very specific on what you're working on. An auditor is auditing to a standard and compliance to the standard, and that's it. So if you're looking at SQF 2.2 document control, you would be asking the questions that are in the SQF audit. Then the auditor is looking for compliance to the standard, and they don't go out of that box. If they were to start saying things like, oh, well, if you did this with your document control, this would be better. No, that's consulting, and that is verboten. That's forbidden. You can't do that. So there's two very different functions here, and sometimes people get them mixed up. And
I am not an auditor. I am a consultant, but I conduct second party auditing, right?
Right. So those are going to be referred to. This is another level of definitions: is accredited versus non-accredited.
Yes.
So there's a whole mechanism with accreditation where you have third parties and all this type of stuff that we won't get into. But yeah, anybody who has knowledge on these subjects and is a relevant professional can audit on these type of activities. So on the audit side of things, when you were helping them prepare, and I think this gets to the question that's being asked here too from Indrani, and I hope I'm saying your name correctly there, is so when you were helping them prepare in auditing, what standard were you using then, Alicia, to help them?
Yeah, the 21 CFR 117.
All right, so
yeah, straight. Part of the email that FDA had sent. So they called this a partial scope. And the reason being is because they were only focusing on the food, okay? And they were only looking at certain elements. So they had sent a checklist, and and the checklist was 21 CFR. So it was, which I'm very familiar with. So it was easy on that. Versus the GFSI, like she asked, the gaps. No.
So nothing huge, just
nothing huge. Physical, right? They had to clean up physically. It was in bad shape when I first arrived. And I said, look, we're going to treat this like a U.S. plant. And this would not be acceptable in the U.S. It shouldn't be acceptable here. We got to clean this up. So it was shocking that maybe some of those things weren't written up on their GFSI. So we know FDA does do a physical inspection, but documentation, there were no gaps, none at all.
Gotcha. Good. So what then were some of those differences between how a plant in India is operating from the physical side, maybe the GMP side, versus the US? What differences did you see?
Well, a lot of them were cultural. Okay. So that was a little eye-opening for me. GMPs, they did have in certain areas, of course, they had a full battle rattle, where it was considered food. And again, they had segregated lines. But on the non-segregated lines, barefoot employees, which is okay. The bathrooms were a little different, no toilet paper. You've got the bidet hose, which I had to be shown how to use. I'll put it out there, ladies. Okay. I had to say, I don't know what I'm doing here. Especially with no toilet paper. And then what if I did flush toilet? I was just anyway. So culturally, and just different standards of cleanliness, different standards of just cultural, but everybody was extremely friendly, and that was helpful.
And so when we were talking, getting ready for the chat as well, we were kind of talking about just physically being there as a woman in a foreign country, the food and all these type of things. How was that like?
Yeah, that was eye-opening as well. And again, it was really exciting. And I do think everybody should go visit once. But I was in Western India, and not only that, I was in an area that it's not well known. It was, I think the drive was 6 hours to the Taj Mahal. So I wasn't close to any touristy areas, and it was industrial. The food I learned on the second trip, it's all vegetarian. It's all vegetarian based. A lot of people already know this. I didn't, unless you ask for meat, and that meat is primarily chicken. So because in the area I was, not all of India, but the area I was, the cow was sacred, and they were roaming free in the streets. So that was not an option. The meat option was chicken, but the food was delicious. I mean, I was in the military, so I've eaten, in other countries, and the base for all this stuff is cottage cheese. So it's
Really?
all very interesting.
Very cool. And that's one of the things, and a slight, diversion off what we're talking about here, but traveling outside of the U.S. is so eye-opening. I've had the good fortune to be able to do this over my life on a few occasions, and it opens your perspective, because in the U.S. we think this is how the world lives. It's not even close. And when you go to foreign countries and you're there for a period of time, one of the things that will become really obvious early is that you see no news about the U.S., right? They don't care. They've got their own things going on. And it's actually refreshing to not be inundated with the local news and what's going on and who's fighting who. And it really opens up your view. And I think that's really important. And it's good that you were able to quickly adapt and adjust to that reality, because that's their reality. And you need to judge it in that scope.
Yeah. Yes. It was right now, the big TV show over there is The Big Bang Theory. So that's on almost every channel. So just a fun fact.
Now, one of the things I always love to do when I go to foreign countries is go to the grocery stores and look around and see what people eat and these type of things. Were you able to kind of looking around in like any stores or anything like that?
A little bit. So not so much stores, but kiosks on the side of the road, I guess would be the term. And I definitely went with the young lady who was I was working with. They also assigned me a driver who would take me to the stores if I wanted, but he helped me with my translation, and he helped haggle prices. The spice, it's just very different. The spices on the side of the road, which you can't really bring home, so I couldn't really bring home any amazing spices, but just to see them all on the side, the different candies. I did bring home some different candies, and those were amazing, and some little souvenirs for the kids and whatnot. But it just was a little shocking. I didn't take much video because I was living it, and I was just there and soaking it all in. And again, the cows walking free, just nothing I've experienced.
Very cool. So Carlin has kind of a follow-up question here, kind of to what Indrani was talking about here as well, is gap closure. So as you were finding these type of things that you knew FDA wouldn't be too happy with, were you successful in helping them close those gaps?
Absolutely. So that's a good question. Back on topic, I get it. Absolutely. We did have some struggles. And also, as part of my visit, I conducted some training for all the employees. So we broke them up into groups. Of course, you can't train everybody, at once. We broke them up into groups, the day shift and night shift and weekends and all this. And we taught them, and we said, look, this is how it's going to be now, not just for this visit, but this is the new expectation. And there was a change, and it was palpable to me, right? When I went back and everything was fixed, and the smiles on their faces and the pride that they were showing. Look at my clean uniform and look at my shoes. And you could just tell that, they didn't fight it. So all the gaps got closed or were actively being closed, with document to prove. We're working on that right now. Because the end result, 0 findings on the 483.
Nice. Well, and that's a testament to you. That's good work on your part.
Yeah.
Nice.
Hey, well, and the company did a lot of work too. The teams worked a lot too. So they had 3 months to get it together, and they did it. And which proves it can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, if you have the commitment, this goes back to what we talk about a lot, food safety culture. If you have the right culture, you can do these things. Now, this was a pretty large facility too, right? A lot of people?
A lot of people, yeah, about 200, 250 people.
Yeah.
Very large. Gosh, I'm so bad with like 700,000 square feet, 800.
Wow.
It
Yeah,
was large.
that's
And
huge.
even so, we focused on the food lines, but since I was there, right, they got to get their money's worth. So we did the whole rest of the facility. And not only that, when I was there for the last visit, FDA only took 2 days, but I was there for the whole week. So after that, they said, we want to take you to the new building we're building, and we want to bring you back for when that's ready for FDA. So, and the new building, of course, is going to have everything that you want because you can build it correctly the first time around, coving and everything. So
Nice. And so it sounds like you had very good management commitment
absolutely.
And this was a privately held company, right?
It was private, and yes, I'm telling you guys, I'm telling you, if you're using some additives, you probably have them in your warehouse. So it was a big deal. They wanted to continue doing business with US, so you got to comply, and they definitely had the commitment for that.
Great. So you went over there 2 times to help them prepare, right?
Yes.
How was the actual trip itself? Did you have time to recover when you got there, or was it pretty much you landed and you were going?
No, I had time to recover. It was long. I've never been on that kind of flight. I flew out of Boston, which is an international, airport for me. And then each time was going through different places, but through to Dubai and then to New Delhi and then another plane, just all these different stops. It was very, very long. But I would fly on a Friday, and of course, I'm fortunate to be able to sleep on the plane, so I caught myself up. So it wasn't too bad. I prepared. I've been traveling for a long time, so you kind of learn.
Yep, definitely. And the key to that is pack light. Yeah, don't if you can't carry it, you're bringing too much. You can clean clothes when you're over there. That's always been my experience too.
Absolutely.
So we've been talking about the elements of the audit and everything else. And so you go out there, you help them prepare, everything's looking great, and then you're coming back for the FDA audit, right?
Yes.
How'd that go? Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So FDA walks in, and we've said this before, and whether we want to, we're saying the quiet part out loud. It depends on the auditor. You never know how an audit is going to go because you don't know the auditor. They could be in a good mood. They could be in a bad mood. You just never know. So you have to prepare, for anything. So he walks in, and very tall, very, very tall man, at least 6'5", at least, if not, yes, like yeah, my neck was straining to talk to him. It was funny. But he was wearing jeans, and so I went, we're gonna be fine. Like he was relaxed. It was very hot. Not that I expected him to walk in shorts, but I'm like, wow, it's hot outside, and he walks in a polo shirt and jeans. There was a couple of things that we know about FDA here. They don't always sign, when you ask them to sign things. That didn't change. There were some things that he didn't sign. He said he read it. Okay, I refused to sign, which is what they do. But good news, like if he says no, that just okay,
Yeah.
Then behind the scenes, you just write, refuse to sign. So he walked in, and all of that, showed his credentials. They had the guards out, in their full gear. The guards were not out when I was there.
Guards. Hold on. Guards. What are guards?
Security guards. I'm sorry, security guards.
Oh.
By the front door.
Oh, wow.
We're in this military outfit, and it was beautiful actually. But I was like, what? I never saw them before. So that was kind of interesting. So he's, he talked to them, showed identification, they stopped him and all this. And then once he got to the conference room, he went through it. And he said, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to walk the floor. I'm going to look at this. I'm going to ask these questions of the employees. Everything that we had prepared for, which is, again, priceless. It was almost too perfect,
Yeah.
And he asked for a couple of things. Once he started asking for a couple of things, do you have pest control? That's when the team jumped and said, well, we put together a presentation. So every time he then went to another topic, sanitation, preventive controls, right? CCPs and PCs, environmental monitoring, which was reviewed, but didn't necessarily apply because of what the product was.
Okay.
So very low risk pathogens don't grow. All this stuff. And they had the mini PowerPoint presentations available and had all the information, and they were ready just in case he wanted to see the policy itself. They had that available. So openings, credits, and all that good to go. Went out to the facility. Of course, we told him dedicate. Yeah.
Well, you told me something funny. We were talking about this on Monday, is that for that opening meeting, pretty much it was jam-packed, right?
Oh, yes. Everybody shows up for the opening meeting and the closing meeting. And then during the day, like you don't see anybody. Yeah, that's pretty typical. The owner came, the VP, everybody was there. Yeah.
Well, and that's always, it's a good tip in that if you're showing commitment, having those people there, that's always a wow. And I'm sure FDA did this too. They're like, oh, hi everybody, right?
Yes. Yes. And then to go around and introduce and difficult names. So it's write your name down for me.
Yep,
you spell it, you write it down.
Yep. Let's see here. So Duncan had a question, and I'm glad you're bringing this up, Duncan, because I noticed this too. Could you please expand on the refuse to sign?
I don't know how much you want me to expand. I don't know if there's necessarily a reasoning behind it other than it's always been that way. I know you don't want to hear that. I feel they don't. Oh, gosh, I just don't know.
Well, the bottom line here, under the training programs. So if you're looking into the investigator operations manual and things like this for FDA field agents, they're not allowed to sign anything. They can't initial anything. They can't sign anything, because that can be viewed. And there have been cases in the past, which is why FDA is very strongly positioned on this. It can be viewed as an endorsement of a particular activity. So FDA will never sign anything. But as Alicia said, the correct, and she's 100% right on this, is if they refuse to sign, that's fine. That's fine. Have them go through your facility GMP checklist. Have them go through your training documents to let them in the facility, no watches and all these type of good things. And then just note on there that information gone over with investigator Smith, refused to sign document. And then you sign it, and that's good. Conversely, should you ever sign anything? No, you should not. Now, this is a very wide generic statement I'm making right now, but in most cases, you should never sign anything. Always check with your legal counsel in your company whether it's okay to sign something or not. Should you sign a 483? Should you sign a warning letter? All these type of things that FDA may put in front of you. I've had instances where FDA has asked me to initial their notes. No, do not, because that can be used in a court case to say that Brian Armentrout, the lead quality person at the facility for the inspection, read and verified by notes and my FDA notes, and by putting his initials on here, confirmed my view of the situation, right? No, don't do that. It's not to your benefit. But anyway, hopefully that's a long-winded explanation. Don't sign anything. And have a no photography, no recording policy in place too. That's a whole nother conversation. So Cortland has a point of order here with FDA. So a 482, what's a 482? A 482 is the notice of inspection. So this is what FDA presents when they come to your facility.
I know.
Good one, Carl. I like that. So did he present a 482 for the inspection?
So he did, but not until he was already in the conference room, and
Yeah.
we jumped the gun and asked for it.
Okay.
So the team had said, "Are you supposed to give us something?" So
Well,
he had it on the computer.
okay, and so Cortland's been a little cheeky here with the corporate spy thing, but can that happen? Absolutely,
Oh yeah.
absolutely.
Well, and also
Someone-
don't forget, this was, so sorry to cut you off, Brian. This was also scheduled, right? So we knew he was coming. So a little different than when it's not scheduled.
Yep, absolutely. So Duncan, looking for a little more clarification here. So you give them your visitor questionnaire, ask them they sign to say that they don't have food poisoning symptoms. They can still verbally assent to these type of things, and you can say, okay, here's our GMP policies. You have no jewelry, you have to wear a hairnet, you have to follow all of our GMPs. If you're exhibiting any signs of illness, you're not allowed in the facility. You can ask them and say, do you have any illnesses or things? And that verbal answer, you can take notes, and there's nothing stopping you from saying this information was gone over with FDA and they acknowledge these activities. However, due to FDA regulations and policy, they were unable to sign.
Yes, and yeah, that's exactly correct. And because there was a COVID questionnaire as well. So that's it. And Brian, that's exactly what they did do. They went down together verbally. Have you had a headache or a fever? This and that. And he answered the questions verbally, and they marked it off. And that's exactly what happened.
Great. And this is why I enjoy the chat here so much, because we have so many smart people on here. So Cortland points out here that actually, technically, he didn't have to use a 482 because it's a foreign inspection and pre-scheduled.
It was pre-scheduled. I agree with that. But again, we were trying to, you never know what could happen. You just never know. So it kind of showed, hey, we did go over this kind of training. We're ready for you. We want to comply. We even know about 482s. We even know about 484s in case that happens. So we were just prepared.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and part of this too, and Duncan is talking about this some more here too, right? Is where have they been? And I have had issues in the past where this is especially true in dairy plants. So you will have inspectors. So I worked for a company in Pennsylvania, and they have state inspectors, and they would visit our farms that we bought milk from, and they would visit our plant, and they would come to the plant with their government issued state of Pennsylvania lab coat and work shoes and boots that they would use to muck around at the farm. I wouldn't let them wear those in the plant. And I would say, you do know that you were in a farm with all kinds of nasty gooey stuff. We'll give you some new stuff to wear while you're here. And they're like, oh yeah, you're right. And they were like, oh, good thinking. I didn't even think about that, because that's just part of how they're doing stuff. And I never had an inspector say, no, I'm wearing my stuff. And if they did, it would have been a big problem.
Yeah, I haven't had that either.
Right. So it sounds, and I mean, this is great back and forth, guys. Thank you very much. But it sounds like pretty much the opening protocol and how FDA was managing this was very similar to the UN.
Everything was similar. Again, it comes down to the auditor, and it comes down to the scope. And we had the limited scope, meaning just two lines that made food instead of the diet, all the pharma and all that stuff. And it was a 2-day audit. So knowing that ahead of time, come on. And even then the second day was maybe a couple hours.
All right. So you did the normal opening routine. So he started looking at documentation and then went out on the floor. Is that how it kind of went? How did the actual inspection go?
He didn't necessarily look at documentation. He was asking questions. What do you have in place? And do you have this and that? And the team was ready to give. He didn't actually ask for records until we got out of the physical inspection, because then he had he had more knowledge of machine names and numbers. Right. So, okay, now pull the records for metal detector number 3, for example, and I want to see these records for this one. So that was pretty much more how it went. Some policies reviewed ahead of time, but mostly records were after the fact.
Gotcha. And so you had mentioned that he wanted to interview people on the floor. Did he talk with people on the floor?
And he absolutely did. So those that hold CCP duties and those that hold preventive control duties is where he goes to first. And the supervisors and the managers always want to, jump in and answer for them. So I think the way, because he was so tall and the way he stood, you know, talking to that person, nobody else could kind of jump in.
Uh-huh.
So that didn't really happen. But when there was some translating that was needed, you know, he said, can you help me, you know, translate this? So he asked about CCPs, PCs, and basic food safety, meaning how long to wash your hands, things like that, very basic.
Gotcha. So did they have good hand wash facilities then for coming in the plants and all that?
Yes.
Okay.
All that stuff was good to go. And again, they provided full gear, a full bodysuit, and this man was so tall he busted right out of the hood. It was comical, but of course, you know, he was laughing, so it was okay to laugh. But he's like, "This is really," so it was kind of funny. They did tell me though that they bought like extra long ones for the future, because I'm like, well, that's smart, because you never know.
You never know. Well, and I feel sorry for this guy too, because I'm around 6'4", and traveling internationally is a challenge as it is. And if you're tall, it's even worse, right? Because now you're sitting in the plane like this, and you're trying to sleep and stuff like this. It can be difficult. Cortland had a good question here. Water quality. How was water quality evaluated? Good question.
That is a good question. And this was again a very particular. I've only been to one company. They actually had RO water on site. So they did it was very interesting. So they have their own microbiology lab on site too. So they did their own testing, and they filtered their own. So it was a pretty heavy program, more than what you would normally see, but it's because they were doing, you know, the reverse osmosis in-house, which is not typical. Some places do it, but it's not typical. So now that's for the facility. Now, if you're asking me about water, as in me walking around drinking water, you know, they did provide bottled water. One of the things I learned that even they taught me was be very mindful of bottled water out in the streets, because the caps, they reuse the bottles, and they're not trying to re-put a new tamper-proof cap. They'll just put the same one. So that, oh my gosh, that did happen a few times where I was offered bottled water at a restaurant and it was already opened. And so, you know, I just didn't drink it. I was just mindful of it. So I'm not sure what water you're talking about, but there's both waters.
Yeah, absolutely. So you had mentioned earlier then, Alicia, that this was a relatively industrial rural area. Do you know if it was well water or was it city water? How did the water come?
I know it was city water, and that's all I know.
Interesting.
And the hotel was clean, and that's all I know.
So Cortland here. So Burkholderia, it can be problems. Giardia, potential in areas like that. Something to be careful with as well would be crypto. So making sure that with your RO systems, which are great because they're going to provide a barrier. Did they have any UV systems, or was it just RO?
No, there was some UV in there too. Yes.
Okay, good. But yeah, it's something. It's good that the gang is bringing this up here today. Is a lot of times water gets overlooked, and water is so important in our operations in production that it just kind of we don't see it because it's so common. And if you have a water problem, man, it can cause you grief for sure.
Yeah.
Right. Getting a little bit of mic noise here for some reason. Not quite sure why. There we go. Much better. Silence. Brings to mind the hose. So anything surprising during the audit that FDA brought up that you were like, oh, and or an area that he dove into that you weren't expecting?
No. Quite the opposite. He was not interested in seeing the micro lab. And again, this is one experience. And I want everybody to keep in mind, this was not food. So it's, yes, he was there to audit the 21 CFR 117, but this is not a food that you would consume directly. And he knew that. And you could tell the way, I could just see his brain clicking when he was looking at things. It was a closed loop system. you know, a lot of powders and dry area. So he didn't look at as much as I thought he would look at.
Mm-hmm.
And no, there were no surprises. None.
Okay. So it sounds like, I mean, so generally, we've talked about this here on the chat before, FDA will divide their audits into two categories, GMP audits, as they call them. So they're looking at kind of what you're talking about, and then more of the for-cause audit. So they're going to a facility because they have an issue. There have been complaints, or it's a high-risk material they're worried about, things like this, and they're really going to dive into your food safety plan. The first one is more common because FDA can cover more ground that way. If they find issues during a GMP audit, they can definitely escalate. If they see food safety issues, they can dig into it. So it's good that things went pretty smoothly.
It did, and at the end, on the last day, the auditor did allow us to have our own little Q&A with him, just to kind of help fill in the gaps that maybe I didn't know, or just questions that the facility had. So they did ask about pictures. You know, what he didn't ask to take any, but they're like, what do we do? Why do you take pictures? And they were really, and he said, I'll tell you, we don't normally until we see an issue. And then it's just for evidence. And the same goes with records. When we ask for copies of records, sometimes it's evidence to prove this is not right and this helps state my case, but also sometimes it's proof of, look, I reviewed it, you know, and you know, certain things they will always ask for, an organizational chart, you know, certain things.
Right.
Yeah. So he did answer some questions that the team had, and I thought that was really nice. I was like, okay, so, you know, he just gave us a little peek, little peek.
So he did take pictures.
He did not take pictures.
Oh, did not. Oh,
no,
okay, good.
He said that he would if he found issue. And they said, what would you, if you did ask to take a picture, how would it be okay if we took it? If you took it, are you going to insist that you take it? And he answered those questions, and he said, you can take it. Chances are they're going to take it themselves. It depends on the auditor and what the situation is. He says it's very situational based. He goes, but we're not just taking one picture. We're taking one picture here, one from back here. So if I'm going to rely on your photos, I'm going to tell you where I want the photo taken. So that was one thing that he mentioned, but he said either way, he tries to work with the company and their policy, you know, as much as possible.
And so that's a little quick segue on that. That sounds very similar to the US. So if you're a food manufacturer and you don't have a clearly defined photography policy, recording policy in place for your company, you need to have one. Yes. Because as Alicia just said, and this is really important, so I want to circle back on this, is they're gathering evidence. So if FDA starts pushing to take photographs in your plant, it means there's something they don't like. And those pictures could show up in a court case later. So you need to have this defined ahead of time. In our modern times, something to think about as well is phones on the floor. Do you allow phones on the floor in your plant?
It's a great question.
Yep. Cortland has a highly technical question here. He wants to know the wavelength on the UV, 254 or 210 nanometer.
Cortland, I don't remember.
He's killing us. Come on, Cortland.
All great questions, but
question here from yeah, that's a very in-depth question. So from a user whose name's not showing up. So they're for environmental monitoring. Did they do any swabbing of hands?
They absolutely did. And they even did me, right, to show me kind of, because I was there, you know, long enough and built a rapport. And they said, okay, let's see, which everything was fine. They do hands, they do feet. They had a very robust EMP program. Again, it blew my mind.
Nice.
Yeah.
A good tip here for people is stamp documents with confidential, not for release when providing copies. Yes, absolutely. So we're getting some really interesting information here that's kind of trickling into our conversation. Is all the information you provide to FDA under FSMA, which anything relative to your food safety programs, completely fair game. FDA has the right to review that information. And if they choose to do so, they can make a copy and take it with them. Now, if they're doing that, like the photography, you get something going on. what a lot of people don't know is under the Freedom of Information Act, your competitors could subpoena that information with FDA. Well, not a subpoena, but they can do a FOIA request and get copies of your confidential plant information. So you have to be very careful with the information you're supplying and make sure that it's protected. Now, if it's confidential, FDA may redact, but do they get the right stuff redacted? Maybe, maybe not. So you have to be careful on that. So, wow, we're getting kind of close to the end here. So let's bring it back. So the closeout with FDA, sounds like everything went great.
Yes. Yes, he had a very brief closing meeting. He did not provide a 483, so there was nothing to sign or decline signing. And he said, yeah, you'll get like a report in like 6 months. But even then, the report is just proof that I was there. So he didn't leave anything. Zero findings. He was very impressed. He complimented the fact that they reached out to a U.S. consultant to. He said, I could tell that there was some work here done, and that's good. And that's what the company wanted. They wanted FDA leaving with a good feeling, like, okay, they're doing the right thing, and that definitely happened. And you can't ask for anything better.
And that's an important point. Is auditors, investigators, if they see that you are making the effort and that you're trying and that you're moving in the correct direction, and that there aren't, obviously major flaws, but they'll give you some slack. If you hide things, if you give sneaky answers, if you aren't completely honest, auditors pick up on that immediately, and you're in for a world of hurt. So never do that.
Well, I mean, no, they're investigators.
Yeah,
That's
correct.
what they do.
They're investigators. They're no longer inspectors. They are investigators. So then you came back to the U.S. And so how was your client in the U.S.? I would imagine they were quite happy with what you were able to do.
Yes. And that's pretty much it. It was, they passed. Everything was great. Even the FDA man also said, look, I probably won't be back for another 5 to 7 years. So
Nice.
and because it was low risk, right? And because everything was, showing in good standing. So yes.
Definitely. So obviously with this is an incredible amount of effort, time, money, investment. So you can't do this with everything. So this kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. If you have foreign suppliers and you need to identify, like we've done here, to the plant level, critical to your operations, this is something you should consider doing and making sure that that supply chain is protected. And you're also building up that relationship with them as well.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and this is the world we're going towards, is where we need outside help. We can't do everything all the time. So you find yourself reaching out to consultants more. And do they cost? Yeah, but there's a wonderful outcome that can come from it, and in this case, it's great. It was a great outcome. Everybody was happy on all fronts.
And your client now knows that they have a good supplier and they can sleep well at night.
Yes, absolutely.
That's what matters. Well, that's a fantastic story. Thank you, Alicia. It's something we don't get to see very much. So pulling back that curtain and seeing the mechanism and how everything went and sharing that, thank you. That was just great.
Yeah, thanks for letting me share. It's just something, I mean, how many consultants get to say they went to India for an FDA? Just was, the stars were aligned. It was really interesting, and I look forward to going back.
Fantastic. So with that, guys, unfortunately, oh, hi, Cara, nice to see you. With everybody, one of the things here for the chat that you may have heard about, I had a post on LinkedIn on this, that my book got taken off of Amazon because of all these issues going on with AI. So I actually use this as an opportunity to go in and revise and re-edit my book. And it took a little while to get that back on, but the good news is my book is back on Amazon. Yay! So here's the link to that. And so I updated all the graphics in there. I have color in the book now, which is super cool. It's funny, writing a book is hard, but editing and formatting the book is harder. It's amazing. You would think it's easy. It's not easy, but it was definitely worth it. So if got the link in there, if anybody's interested in that, or anybody else who would be interested in some of the tips and tricks I've learned in my career, pass it on. Glad to help. So with that, we'll bring our chat to a close here for this week. And as always, Alicia, thank you. What an amazing conversation.
Thank you, Brian.
And thank you to our amazing participants. Right? I no longer call them guests because they're actually part of this chat as well. And we appreciate everything that's said here. Amazing comments, guys. Keep it up, because we will be back here next week. Same time, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, where we live stream on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. And I'll have another amazing guest like Alicia on next week. But in the meantime, enjoy your weekend. Have a good one out there. It's summer. Have some fun, and we'll do it all again next week. So enjoy, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.